Hey, this is the Daily Overpass. My name is Eric and I make apps. Now today I want to ask you, is it okay to ask someone, what's your budget? Alright, now a few years ago I made a minute of Overpass video called Don't Ever Tell Anyone Your Budget. I think it was like 2 years ago, right? And of all my videos it has the most thumbs down. And basically what I said in it was that if you're going to get an app developed or any kind of software developed and you go to a developer and their first question to you is, so tell me, what's your budget? Basically I said, don't tell them, it's none of their business, right? Your budget is your own business, right? The things cost what they cost. It's up to them to come up with an estimate. It's up to them to come up with something that they think would be agreeable to you and that what they would think would be fair, not something that's based on your budget. Right? And of all the videos, it has the most thumbs down, right? People just generally hated, because I think a lot of people do do that. And so I was doing some research trying to see what's the best practice here. And there's two camps. There's some people who says when somebody comes to you and they have a problem and they're looking for a solution, it's up to you to give them the best solution possible based on their budget. So if they come to you and say, I only have this amount of money, you can either pass on it or accept to do it, but at a very limited way. And there's the other side of the argument that says, they come to you and basically with requirements, you ask them what their requirements are, and and then you come up with a quote or a ballpark estimate, say, roughly, I think this is how much it's going to cost. And if they don't have that budget, that's up to them to get that budget, or if they can meet that budget, then whatever. Right? So, in both sides, it makes sense, but, and every so often, like the way that we work when we do work with clients is they always email with like just a simple email saying, hey, I need an app, how much does it cost, right? And you can't give an answer based on that, so there's a lot more information that you need. So, we usually arrange like a 10 to 15 minute, chat over Skype or a phone call, right? Where we'll, just have a, chat about what it is they're trying to achieve, and then ask all the right questions, all the questions based on experience. Do you want social media integration? What platforms do you want it on? All this kind of stuff. And we've been trying to stream that a lot lately by including, rather than just scheduling that first meeting, we just send them a quick questionnaire saying, these are a few questions we're going to ask, right? That kind of stuff. What kind of platforms, all this stuff. You could have a brief summary of what it's going to be. Do you need an NDA first? All that kind of stuff. Just so we get all that out of the way and we don't waste any time, right? Because time is money. So and sometimes I'll have that first conversation. Like if we're way too busy to do it ourselves, we'll have it like with a partner company, and sometimes they'll sit in that first conversation over Skype. It's not like they're hidden, like they're just in the call. So I'll introduce them, but sometimes they don't want to ask questions directly to the prospect, so they'll send me questions through Skype, like ask him this, ask him that, and a lot of times it comes up, ask him what his budget is, right? And I say, I just ignore it. I say, no, we don't ask that. I'm opposed to asking what the budget is. First of all, I've done a video that says never tell anyone your budget, and I'm just sort of opposed to it. And this came up again recently because we have somebody helping with that first meeting, and or help scheduling all that kind of stuff. And he was saying, why don't we ask what the budget is in that first questionnaire email? And I was like, no, we don't ask the budget, we just talk to anybody. And they said, but sometimes the budget, their budget is way too small, we can't do that. And I thought, well then I think we still need to talk to them, right? It just and let me tell you why I say this, and you guys can agree with me or disagree with me. I know that we're all busy, and sometimes there's people will come to you with they have a requirement, and there's no way that you could do it based on what they're willing to pay, right? Which is fine, right? But I always believe that you should hear everybody out, right? So a lot of times I'll talk to like a prospect. In fact, it's happened quite a few times where I talk to a prospect and they, we talk about a few things, and I'll ask a few questions and I'll give them a ballpark quote. Like I always try to give them a ballpark quote before the end of the call, right? Not wasting anybody's time saying, based on what you told me, I think this would be probably between £4,000 to £6,000 or whatever. Or whatever it is, right? That's not, it's not a general rule. It always depends, right? Every software project is different. So you know, and then they can say, ooh, that's way outside my budget. And I'll say, hey, you know, hey, sorry about that. But, you know, or, you know, sometimes I'll recommend someplace else. Sometimes I'll say, hey, you should try something like Appy Pie or something. You make the app yourself, all this kind of stuff. There's different options. You know, I'm there to help. And a lot of times they'll come back to me later. In fact, sometimes they'll come back to me like over a year later. I had one guy who called me up and said, Eric, I don't know if you remember me, but we spoke about 2 years ago. And I was trying to pretend like I remembered who he was, but I didn't. So I'm sorry, I just don't remember. So, but then that's a project that we have going on at the moment, which is kind of cool, right? And it's all because we talk to everybody, right? You know, and my whole thing was, you know, this conversation I had this morning about whether or not we should include that question in our initial questionnaire was like, let's say they don't have a budget that's big enough. What do? Do we ignore them? Do we not talk to them? Do we just like, you know, just like, oh, no, thank you, right? This is what gets me about this. This is what gets me about this, right? We've all been in a situation where we've been in a shop, like maybe you're 12 or 13 years old, and you walk into a shop, and you know, and the shopkeeper knows you don't have a lot of money, so they don't give you the time of day, right? You're just, you know, you're just in the way, or maybe you don't have any money at all, but you're just looking around, right? Or, you know, you go into a shop that might be a bit more expensive and you feel like everyone's looking down at you because they know you can't afford this stuff. But you know what? You will someday. I can remember going into a bookshop in town. We used to go all the time, and the lady in there was so rude. It's like, you know, if you're not buying anything, you have to leave, right? And it's just, you know, and after a while, you know, you start making a little bit of money as a kid, you know, where you get your first job and everything. You know, the last thing you're going to do is buy from that lady, right? I always believe that anybody we talk to, you know, if they're not going to be our client now, they might be one day, right? We're not in a position to turn anybody away. We all know what it's like to be on the other end of that, right? And, you know, the fact of the matter is that with software, you know, 80% of the time when someone calls you up, they have no idea how much it's supposed to cost, right? If you say, so tell me what's your budget, and they say, I don't know, $100, right? You're like, oh no, no way we could do that. You know, are you kidding me? No, you know, because they don't know, right? They don't know if it's going to cost $100 or $1,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 or $1 million, right? They just don't know. It's like if I went to go buy a rocket ship, right? Let's say rocket ships came out and I had to call a contractor and say, I need a rocket ship. And they say, what's your budget? And I say, dude, just tell me how much it's going to cost. You know, this is what I want. I want to go into space. I need like 3 seats, you know, whatever I need. But, you know, tell me how much it's going to cost. And either I'm going to spit my coffee out and say, whoa, no, you know, and then I might go away and think about it. How can I get that kind of money? Or I might think I'll check somewhere else. Or I might think, you know, that's never going to happen. But it's, you know, it's not up to me to decide how much it's supposed to cost. Anyway, a little bit of a rant there, right? Let me know what you guys think. If somebody calls you up, like let's say if you do service work, if you do client work, and somebody calls you up, do you feel it's appropriate to ask them what their budget is? Or, you know, do you feel, you know, from both sides of it, let's say you're the service provider, they come to you, they're looking for a project, is it acceptable to ask them their budget first? Second, if you're in the other position and you're going to a service provider, do you feel it's acceptable for them to ask you what your budget is? Or do you think it's better for them to tell you the price and then you decide whether or not it's within your budget? Anyway, a little bit of a rant here today, but you know, it just gets on my nerves. Anyway, that's it for today. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.